Okay, and so this is our presentation on questions related to mergers and acquisitions. So this is for vendors who contact us and say that they're part of a merger or an acquisition. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so we do have an article in MindTouch for this. It is an internal article. It's called Collaborat Internal Process when a vendor firm is acquired or merged and needs to change vendor name. Now this could also be applicable if the tax ID needs to change, or if maybe they just need to amend the name of the vendor. So for example, Norton Rose and Fulbright Jaworski, they merged and became Norton Rose Fulbright. So the name did change, and I think Fulbright Jaworski is no longer in the system. So most of the other accounts, I think, were just updated with the new name. All right, so the article explains that there's two different ways to do this, and it's really helpful if you get some input from the client on what they would like to see, because they're the ones that are receiving bills from the firms or the vendors, and they would have some say in whether or in how the vendor account is changed. So there's two different ways that the article discusses. The first way is if the client needs to keep the vendor information for historic purposes, then we would want to leave that name alone. Now, if the client does not need to keep the vendor information for historic purposes, then we can just amend the name and tax ID in Collaborat. And the other issue is that if they do need to maintain that vendor account for historic purposes, then we need to create a new vendor in Collaborat. Now this is applicable, I think the second one, where the client wants to maintain this for historic purposes, is more likely for CNA, for example. They want to keep that vendor for historic purposes. I think also some of the oil companies or the energy companies want to also keep it for historic purposes. So I think basically they need to like keep track of like the valid tax ID, and so that's one of the reasons that we have this article. So the emphasis should be on that. The decision should be between the client and the vendor, and especially if there's multiple clients involved, the vendor may need to work with each client separately. So yeah. So if you use any of the tags in MindTouch, you'll be able to get to that article. So usually I just look up the word merge. You can also look up change vendor name or vendor name change, acquired. So those are the tags at the bottom. All right, so the other issue that we have with this particular question is that many firms, they think, oh, we just need to jump to option 2, which is we're going to change the vendor account. We're just going to update our name. And so maybe they'll say, how do we change our firm's name in Collaborat? And sometimes they'll expand on that and say, our firm merged with another firm. How do we change our firm's name in Collaborat? And so if you get any questions about that first question, how do we change our firm's name, maybe it would be helpful to probe with some more questions. And I think after you've worked on some of these cases where we botched it, or we didn't do it right, then you come into this particular question with some experience. And so this is the goal of this meeting, is to like maybe give you some experience before having to actually experience the issue yourself. Okay? So it would be helpful if you ask some probing questions when say, oh, we need to change our vendor's name or our company's name. So maybe you could ask, why do you want to change your firm's name? Have you discussed this with your client? Will your tax ID also change? Find out what you can see in Collaborat as a MetroTech admin or MetroTech support user. Also, review the email carefully. Maybe there's some information in the email that, maybe in their signature they say, oh, we've merged with so-and-so, and now we're this name. Or sometimes they say, our address has changed, or something like that. And then also it could be that there's an email thread with some additional information in the case. So asking probing questions is a great idea. And then the support team should be really cautious about, just explaining to firms how to update the vendor profile without finding more information. Minor edits to the profile are usually not a problem. So like if somebody's getting started with Collaborat and they notice that their tax ID isn't correct, it's not a problem if they need to change or update their tax ID. They probably should communicate that with their client if it is wrong, because sometimes the client doesn't have that information to automatically update their contact record, so it only shows up on the Collaborat record. So the basic ask is that you try not to send this article without finding out more information. So the name of the article is how to access or change my firm's profile information and settings. And that just tells you how to change the settings. All right, for best results, when you use the article, the internal article, try to compose an email to the customer and replace the words in capital letter with the name of the client, if that's appropriate, or the name of the vendor. Usually you would know who that is. So if they talk about having multiple clients, it may not be possible to replace the word client, but if they do only have one client, then it would be. So we have some examples here of actual cases where somebody had a merger and just how we tried to assist them with their inquiry. So this was sent back in 2016. Good afternoon. Effective January 1st, 2016, Huron Legal was acquired by Concilio LLC. Please find the attached notification of the new remittance information, blah, blah, blah. We currently submit invoices electronically. Can you please let us know of the next steps that need to be taken to set Concilio up in the Ebilling system and assign Huron's active matters to Concilio? We have several clients in which we bill via Collaborat. We would like to roll all the clients over as we transition from Huron Legal to Concilio. Thank you. And then the name of this person was Noah Swiller, and he worked. So here was the reply that we sent. So I abbreviated this particular reply, but the reply from the support team was, hello, Noah. Unfortunately, this is not a decision that we, Collaborat support, can make. There's two ways of completing this. First, as your client, you need to keep the existing vendor information for historic purposes. Second, if your client needs to maintain this vendor for historic purposes, we can create a new vendor in Collaborat, and matters and timekeepers will have to be assigned the same as a new vendor onboarding. So one of the problems with Concilio is that they ended up having 4 accounts in Collaborat, and they just changed the name of all of them. But we did want to make sure that they made all the clients aware of that. And eventually they did get access that they needed to all the accounts. And some of the clients they were working with are Apple, Chevron, Cisco, Google. And it could be that maybe Huron Legal was disabled, and then they changed the vendor name so that in Team Connect it would still remain for historic purposes. And then maybe Chevron would just go with a new vendor that would start with the name Concilio and their tax ID. Okay, so that's one example. And it did take a while to get through that particular issue. Here's another example I found. This is for Hunt and Andrews Kurth. And so they sent an email that said, yes, we will need to get moved over to the legacy Hunton and Williams platform if needed. Andrews Kurth and Hunton and Williams merged and are now Hunton Andrews Kurth LLP. What is the process to get moved over? Can Collaborat combine the database accounts, or do you need to move it over? We want to confirm what the process is to get the matters and timekeepers over successfully with minimal disruption to the billing process. And they also had a pending invoice on the Andrews Kurth, the AKK account. All right, so we sent a response. Hello, Veronica. Thank you for your note. There's two ways of completing this. First, and then we were able to actually name the client they were asking about. First, does Deutsche Bank need to keep the existing vendor information for historic purposes? If not, we can simply amend the vendor name and information in Collaborat. Second, if Deutsche Bank needs to maintain this vendor for historic purposes, we can create a new vendor in Collaborat. The decision is really between Deutsche Bank and Hunt and Andrews and Kurth, and then also that cautionary note at the bottom. Okay, and then we got a recent email from Lathrop Gage that said, we have merged with Lathrop Gage and need to update our firm information to tax ID and name to Lathrop GPM. So they didn't give a lot of information here, but they did mention the word merge. They mentioned that they needed to update our firm information. So for this, since they did mention the word merge, that should automatically, flag your support senses to explain that they need to work with the client on this. So here's a sample response. Hi, JC. There's two ways of completing this. Does your client, first, does your client need to keep the existing vendor information for historic purposes? If not, we can simply amend the vendor name and information in Collaborat. Second, if your client needs to maintain this vendor for historic purposes, we can create a new vendor in Collaborat. The decision is really between the client and the vendor. It looks like you're billing to CNA and Selective Insurance. Note, since multiple clients are involved, you should work with each client separately. So those are some samples of how we can facilitate, this conversation that needs to happen between the client and the vendor. And we shouldn't just encourage the vendors to just update their information without having that conversation first. All right. So does anybody have any questions? And if you can unmute yourself if you have any questions, or you can use the chat. So if we get a question about a merge or an acquisition outside of, would everybody feel like they understand how to proceed on that kind of an issue?
Tracy, I have a doubt. Can you go to first example which you have showed?
Let me see if I can get there.
Yeah, regarding this.
One.
Yes. Like there are two companies. Like one is Puran Legal and Concilio. So when you're writing a response, you just mentioned the vendor should work with the client. So I mean, like we ask like Concilio should work with the client, or like Puran Legal should work with the client. I have a confusion regarding this.
Okay, so I do remember actually working with them on this particular issue. So the name, so Huron Legal is no longer really a functional company. So basically at that time, there was a Huron Legal account and there was also a Concilio account. And so at this point, when we're responding to them, we should say Concilio should work with this list of clients. And then eventually, they did, contact those clients, and then they asked for access to the Huron Legal accounts, and so we did provide that to them. I mean, I think at first we were trying to point them to the vendor admin, but then we realized, that the vendor admin didn't have access anymore because they were gone. And so, yeah, so we did have to work through a few little kinks because of, our support processes. We want to make sure that we're not handing over, information to people that we shouldn't by creating extra users and stuff. But yeah, basically Concilio was taking over. And so they actually got access to all of the accounts.
We do have a couple of cases where two vendors, an example like vendor A and vendor B are merging, and vendor A and vendor B have the same client like Goldman Sachs. In example, like I can remember it's a drinker something name. It has a
It
common
is
name in that.
Drinker. Yes, it
Yeah,
is Drinker.
they do have a common client, Goldman Sachs. Um, in that case, what we need to do, if it is of like different clients, the merging process is simple. But if it is of like same clients, like similar clients.
Right. So in that case, they will need to work. They will need to have this conversation with the client. Um, you know, Goldman Sachs, do you need to keep this information for historic purposes? And so it could be that at some time in the near future that Goldman Sachs would then disable one of the accounts, and then they would rename the other account and keep billing on that one. Or it could be that maybe Goldman Sachs doesn't want to use either of those accounts. They're both disabled, and then, Drinker LLC is like the new account that Goldman Sachs requests to be set up. And so that would be like the new going forward where invoices would go from.
Uh, I do have like one more question. It's like striking in my mind. Uh, like I have seen in the Team Connect, like I'm undergoing the process of training for the Team Connect. Like there are two types of instances. Like one is contact card. It is like fixed one, and other is like information, like vendor information. Vendor information will be syncing to Collaborative. Like whenever you change something in Collaborative, it goes and syncs, and it shows the same thing. If you see in the contact card, it is like fixed one. For example, like you have said, once the tax ID is changed in the Collaborative, the contact card doesn't changes. The tax ID will be the same, but it do have a like contact information. It's like syncs and the tax ID will be like changing in that. So you're talking in that case, the vendor should contact client and they need to update their contact card so that whenever the invoice is processed, so that it hits the correct account. Am I true?
So I think that there is a setting that will automatically update the contact record, but not all the clients use that setting. So that's why we need to make sure that they're having these conversations. Because if they're not getting that update, that's going to be a problem. And so, our job in support is to make sure that we advise the vendors to have that conversation with their client to make sure, if they don't have that setting on in Team Connect, that, their contact information is correct. And that even if they do have that setting on, that they are aware that it's changed. Okay?
Yeah, understood.
So I think I did actually, after like working on this presentation, I did actually make a slight change on the how to edit my vendor's profile page or information. And I did add a note that said you should discuss any changes you make on the vendor profile page with your client. I think I did say that. Okay, that was a really good question. Does anybody else have any questions? So I wasn't quite sure how long this training session would take, so I did provide a little bit more time in case we went over the 30 minutes, but it looks like that there's not too many questions, so that's fine. I will make the recording available to everybody once that's completed, and I'll also share the slides with everyone too. Does anybody have any further questions about that? Do you think this was helpful?
Yep.
Hi, Tracy.
Yes.
Just a quick question. So recently I had a case where I think I have discussed this with you previously. So the firm is acquired another firm, and there is no more, there's no active users for the other firm. So they requested to create an admin username to access that firm. Is that considered merging?
Did they change? Did they update the name or the tax ID?
No, they haven't done any changes because they have no access to the old one at the firm that they requested a login to update information.
Okay.
Or
so if they're just saying that like the old accountant or the old billing person isn't working there, I'm not sure if like we want to like probe on those as much. I mean, we want to get like the signatory if needed, or maybe, you know, if they mention that they're part of a merger, you could send this information as well. But if they're really trying to just get access to the account, I do remember ASM had this case where this company, they like worked for Denton's, and they were taking over like this account in um, in it was like in Colombia. I think that's what it was. And like this case went on for over a month because we were trying to like get them to like provide more information so that we could like get them set up, because it sounded really weird, like that these people for Denton's were going to be like taking over this other company. I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Like, I don't know, this seems kind of suspicious. But you know, I actually found an article online about it. It was kind of weird, and it was only in this one country that they were taking it over. But I think eventually, you know, we ran out of ways we could help this company, and the client was a little, you know, they were just waiting and waiting for us to like fix it. And so finally I told Asm, okay, just make the user account for this one vendor, but don't make it for any of the other accounts in any of the other countries, because it just looked
I
really
remember
weird.
it. Remember it.
And so, yeah, we need to be cautious, but, you know, at some point, we did make a leap on that one, I think, because I was like, I don't know what else to do. So
okay.
we might have to discuss further, you know, best practices and stuff. But yeah, at some point, sometimes best practices don't work. So.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so, oh, this is the article that I made the slight update on. I made a slight update on this article that mentions they should contact their client if there's significant changes or something like that. All right, so if there's no further questions, I think we're done. Any last questions?
Tracy, can you like Do we have an option like to attach this, or I mean like recording video or like slides to the article, so that like any person, it may be a new joinee,
Oh.
they can like
Oh,